environmental engineer. I recently started in this program, the RIPDES Municipal and Industrial Stormwater Program, back in November, but I've been at DEM for over 20 years. And just before we get started, I just want to let everybody know that, first of all, thank you for attending. I know your time is valuable. We hope to make it valuable for ourselves and all the participants here today. I also want to make sure everybody's aware that we are recording this meeting for future use, so people can refer to it on our website if they were unable to make one of the workshops either today or the one on the 30th. Just to go over the intent of the meeting is intended to provide a preview of the proposed changes to the 2024 MSGP prior to the formal public comment period. This will be an opportunity for all stakeholders to provide DEM with feedback and to get a preview of what we're proposing. And just to remind everybody, DEM's goal, especially in the Office of Water Resources, is to improve water quality in our state. We still have many water bodies that continue to be impaired, and a significant portion of the impacts originate from stormwater discharges. We recently celebrated 50 years of the Clean Water Act, and tremendous progress has been made over that time span. But in order for DEM to achieve its goal for fishable, swimmable waters, we need your help. And we know a lot of you have been working for many years implementing and complying with the industrial general permit. And we hope you continue to do so, because we can't do it without you. Without further ado, we'll get into some introductions. As I said, I'm leading the RIPDES Municipal and Industrial Stormwater Program. Most of you, or some of you, probably had some interactions with Margarita Chatterton and Elliot Anderson in the past. Both of those former DEM team members have moved on to EPA Region 1. Now our team consists of 2 people right now, myself and Jennifer Stout, along with Crystal Charbonneau, who supports our program. And we're looking to hire a new staff person in the coming months. Just to give you guys, all the attendees, some new information that we recently established. We have a new website link. It's an easy way for you to get to our website. It's dem.ri.gov/MSGP. And we also have a general email address that goes to Jennifer and myself, and will go to any new staff people that join our team. That's shown on the screen. I'm going to turn things over to Jennifer right now so she can introduce herself, and then Crystal, and then we get into the presentation.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm Jennifer Stout. Here, I'll put my camera on so you can see my face. Hello. I've been with RIPDES for almost 20 years. And most of that time I've been doing municipal stormwater. So some of you may recognize me from the MS4 program. And as Brian said, now I am also working with industrial stormwater. So, like Brian said, it'll be he and I for now, helping you out with the MSGP permit and any questions that you have. So thanks again for joining us today.
I turned my camera on as well, so you guys can see what I look like if you've never met me.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good. This is Crystal Charbonneau. I've been with DEM since 2017, so some of you or a lot of you may have already worked with me when you guys signed up for NetDMR. I'm the electronic reporting person. So if you're doing any electronic submissions and have questions about getting signed up, or having a new staff member at your team signing up to get access so that they can submit DMRs or other data for your permit, I'm the person that you would be contacting to work through any issues with that. So hello everyone, and my camera is not working, otherwise I would have shown you my face as well. So back to you, Brian.
Thanks, Crystal. Thanks, Jennifer. So in terms of the meeting logistics, we're going to keep cameras and microphones off during the bulk of the presentation. You will be able to answer questions along the way in the chat, and Jennifer and Crystal will be available to answer those questions, and we'll review those questions that were posted in the chat at the end. And we'll also open up the forum for people to raise their hands and ask questions at the very end. So if you think of a question, you don't want to forget it, please enter it into the chat. We will review them, and otherwise we'll just answer any questions that you have at the end. And that's just to keep things efficient. I know everybody's got busy schedules, and again, thank you for being part of today's event. All right, in terms of the agenda, we did the introductions and the meeting logistics. I want to quickly just kind of recap the MSGP as it's structured right now. We're going to spend the bulk of our time talking about the proposed changes, and then we're going to sort of wrap up with the permit reissuance process and schedule, which I'm sure many of you are curious about, you know, what do you have to do next? So we'll go over all that process, all the process portion of this permit issuance, so everybody's clear on what they need to do going forward. And then at the end, we'll follow up with questions and feedback. So as most of you are probably aware, the MSGP was issued by DEM in 2006, 2013, and 2019. It's a 5-year permit. It currently expires. It will expire on May 2nd, 2019, and we intend to reissue this permit again in 2024. When we reissue the 2024 permit, we intend to keep the basic structure of the permit going forward from the 2019 model. It'll continue to rely on adaptive management and pollution prevention as the cornerstones of our pollution prevention and stormwater programs. The key parts of this permit will continue. Facilities will continue to have to develop a site-specific stormwater management plan and maintain that. Facilities will continue to have to do outfall monitoring and routine inspections. Tiered corrective action requirements will still be part of the permit structure, as well as annual reporting. And like we do now, DEM will continue its compliance monitoring efforts through annual inspections and audits. We will review DMR submissions, annual reports, and corrective action reports as we have been doing over the past 5 years. We believe this model that we've been using since the 2019 MSGP was issued is effective, and it allows facilities to make continuous improvements on their stormwater quality. When Elliot Anderson was working in this program, he did a presentation for the marinas and boat builders industrial sector, and he presented this table that you're seeing on the screen. This table shows the applicable zinc benchmark with the yellow dashed line, and it shows that between 2020 and 2022, marinas and boat builders were able to better meet the zinc benchmarks. And we hope this was not a fluke, and this was through all the hard work that the marinas and boat builders were doing to comply with the permit. And this is just one example of the improvements that we hope to see by implementing this permit and this permit structure in the future. The basis for the proposed changes is based on 3 sort of elements. The first is lessons learned from the implementation of the 2019 MSGP. The second is adopting some elements from EPA's 2021 MSGP. And the third element that we tapped into was in 2017, a committee was formed to look at the advancements in the science of stormwater and stormwater treatment, and was tasked with balancing environmental protection with the burden on businesses. This committee made recommendations in an EPA report in 2019, which we will refer to here as the 2019 NRC study. DEM reviewed this study to determine where we can improve on our MSGP. Now we will go through the proposed changes in the general permit. Keep in mind that anything that you see here in these slides, in the next few slides, are changes only. We are not reviewing all the components of the permit in this presentation. The first set of changes affect the new benchmark requirements. The previous permit required universal benchmark parameters of TSS and oil and grease. We plan to change the universal benchmark parameters to TSS and COD. These benchmark parameters and benchmarks values will apply to all sectors going forward. Oil and grease has been replaced with COD. It was determined, based on the NRC study, that COD was a better universal benchmark parameter than oil and grease because it is indicative of oils and hydrocarbon pollution as well as oxygen demand. And it is a better indicator of overall site cleanliness than oil and grease. This requirement also matches EPA's 2021 MSGP. The next benchmark change that we're making is that although we're removing oil and grease as a universal benchmark, we are requiring oil and grease to be applied as a benchmark to the sectors that you see listed here. The 2019 NRC study recommended that oil and grease benchmarks be applied to certain industrial sectors that are more likely to have industrial activities that contribute oil and grease to stormwater discharges. The next parameter that we are adding to the permit to certain sectors is copper. The 2019 NRC study included a review of EPA net DMR data from the 2015 MSGP, EPA's MSGP. And a review of that data found that more than 50% of samples were above the applicable benchmark for copper in the sectors shown here. As a result, we're proposing to add copper to these industrial sectors in our permit. It should be noted that the 2019 NRC study had the same findings for sectors A2, N1, F2, and F4, but our 2019 MSGP already has copper benchmarks for these industrial sectors, so no changes are proposed. The next benchmark parameter that we intend to add to the permit is PCBs, or polychlorinated biphenyls. This benchmark will only apply to Sector N, scrap recycling and waste recycling facilities that are engaged in the processing of construction and demolition debris. So it's not all Sector N facilities, it's only Sector N facilities engaged in this particular activity. Current scientific literature indicates that there was a potential widespread use of PCB containing building materials in schools and other buildings constructed or renovated between about 1950 and 1979. Based on this information, PCB benchmarks will apply to Sector N if C&D debris is processed. It should be noted that in the 2019 MSGP, PCB benchmarks previously applied to Sector N, but it only applied to those Sector N facilities where the shredding or shredding materials are exposed to stormwater. Excuse me, where shredding activities or shredding materials are exposed to stormwater. This previous requirement will continue to apply. The next set of benchmarks that we are adding are aluminum, copper, lead, and zinc. We're adding these benchmarks to Sector P, land transportation and warehousing, including transfer stations, only where the temporary storage and or transfer of solid waste is exposed to stormwater. The reason for this change is stormwater sampling data from the 2019 MSGP showed that transfer stations that were engaged in the temporary storage or transfer of solid waste were likely to have industrial activities with exposure of materials that could result in the discharge of these metals. Under a RIPDES MSGP transfer station initiative undertaken by Elliott Anderson, transfer stations were individually required to conduct additional sampling for these metals. To eliminate the need to address these facilities individually, DEM is making this a standard permit requirement for all applicable facilities. The next proposed benchmark change is to the benchmark antimony. We noticed that the benchmark concentration of 0.64 milligrams per liter was not consistent with our Rhode Island acute water quality criteria. Since stormwater presents short-term impacts to our receiving waters, benchmarks are often established based on acute criteria. We believe that the use of the 0.64 milligrams per liter benchmark was an oversight during the last permit reissuance. As a result, we propose to correct it. And this change only affects subsector G2, which is metal mining, which I don't think we have any metal mining industrial activity in our state, as far as I'm aware. The next two parameters that we intend to address in the permit is the removal of the magnesium and the iron benchmarks. The 2019 NRC study recommended the removal of these benchmarks based on a lack of documented toxicity. The concept of removing these benchmarks is also consistent with EPA's 2021 MSGP. In addition, EPA's water quality regs and Rhode Island's water quality regs do not have an acute criteria for magnesium or iron. The removal of the magnesium benchmark will apply to Sector K, and the removal of iron will apply to numerous sectors as shown here. The next set of changes relate to clarifying language in the permit. We decided to add some clarifying language to the benchmark monitoring requirements in the permit. The reason why we did this is because we want to establish some clear expectations as to what is required. And in this slide, you'll see two requirements that we're adding. The first one is if you have data that's not exceeding benchmarks. If less than 4 benchmark samples were collected for any one parameter in the year, semi-annual benchmark monitoring must continue. The reason for this change is to remove the potential incentives for failing to sample a minimum of 4 times as required by the permit. A similar requirement has been added to the draft permit that if you collect less than 4 benchmark samples in for any one parameter in the year, and the average of the remaining sample results exceeds the benchmark for a given parameter, corrective actions will be triggered. Again, these changes are proposed to establish clear expectations, establish a level playing field across all industries and permittees, and again, as I stated, removes the potential incentives for failing to sample. The next change to the proposed general permit is the addition of a new type of monitoring that we are classifying as indicator monitoring. This indicator monitoring requirement will only apply to Sector P, including transfer stations, if they're engaged in the temporary storage and/or transfer of solid waste that is exposed to stormwater. The parameter that will need to be monitored is entero, which is a bacteria indicator. This indicator monitoring category differs from benchmark monitoring. The reason why we established this new category for entero is that bacteria is very difficult to eliminate completely from stormwater. As a result, we didn't want to treat it exactly like a benchmark. However, we believe that requiring monitoring in this category for this parameter will allow facilities to collect data, track trends, further inform their corrective action implementation and stormwater management plan revisions with the goal of reducing bacteria levels in stormwater. I referred earlier to a RIPDES MSGP transfer station initiative. This transfer station initiative also required facilities that were in Sector P that had these particular solid waste handling activities to sample for entero. To eliminate the need to address these facilities individually as we have in previous years, we are including this indicator monitoring requirement for all applicable Sector P facilities in the permit. It is also important to note that indicator monitoring sampling frequency is identical to the benchmark sampling frequency. Moving on to additional proposed changes in the permit. Previously, corrective action report submissions were sent to DEM and currently are sent to DEM via standard mail or email. Going forward, we would like facilities and we're requiring facilities to upload their corrective action reports as part of their annual report submissions. The corrective action report must document any corrective actions that were implemented over the past year or corrective actions that are planned for the following year. Any operational, structural, or treatment BMPs that were proposed or installed as corrective actions under the 2019 MSGP must be either installed if they were proposed or maintained going forward under the 2024 MSGP. The next category of changes relates to allowable non-stormwater discharges. As many of you are aware, building washdown and power wash water was an allowable non-stormwater discharge allowed under the 2019 MSGP. We propose to add some additional requirements consistent with EPA's 2021 MSGP. Those requirements are that operators must take steps to filter, detain, and settle solids prior to discharge. The second change that we're proposing to the allowable non-stormwater discharge portion of the permit is allowing pavement wash water to be discharged. This pavement wash water must contain no detergents or hazardous cleaning products. Oil and grease, sources of industrial pollutants, or any other toxic or hazardous materials must first be cleaned up using dry methods. And again, similar to the building washdown and power wash water requirement, operators will be required to filter, detain, and settle solids prior to discharge. This requirement is also consistent with EPA's MSGP that was issued in 2021. The next set of changes that we propose to the permit is requiring facilities to minimize stormwater impacts from major storm events. What we're asking permittees to do is implement structural improvements, enhance resilient pollution prevention measures, or other mitigation measures to minimize the impacts of major storm events such as hurricanes, storm surge, extreme heavy precipitation, and flood events. To do this, we're asking facilities under the new permit to evaluate the likelihood of impacts from major storm events based on the facility location. Appendix E of the draft permit includes guidance and links to online maps to determine your site risk. After you determine your site risk, we're asking facilities to develop strategies in their stormwater management plan to minimize pollution potential. Examples of the types of things that could be done and that are outlined in the permit are temporarily storing materials and potential pollutants above the base flood elevation level, reinforcing material storage structures to withstand flooding and additional exertion of force, temporarily reducing or eliminating outdoor storage, and planning for future site improvements, considering the facility location and storm event risks. The last set of changes we classify as miscellaneous. The first miscellaneous change that we're proposing is putting in a requirement in the permit that monitoring must be completed even if the qualifying rain event is outside of normal business hours. The second change that we're proposing is to remove the automatic transfer option from CDX. Permits must be terminated by existing owners, and then a new owner will need to submit a separate new NOI as two separate actions. The reason why we're making this change is that ultimately the outcome will be the same, but we have found that under the automatic transfer option that we previously or currently have in the 2019 MSGP, in that process, we were losing the historical data when a permit was transferred. So to eliminate that possibility, we're proposing this change, and we're making it a two-step process, and this is consistent with EPA's MSGP. The third miscellaneous change is that stormwater management plans must be uploaded as part of the NOI submission. Previously, web links were an option to comply. Facilities were allowed to provide a web link to their stormwater management plan. We are eliminating this option because it helps us track compliance much easier, especially if a web link goes down and we can refer to a previous stormwater management plan through Net MSGP. The fourth miscellaneous change is not that impactful, but it was something we wanted to do to be consistent with our regulations. The previous permit required records to be maintained for a minimum of 3 years. This requirement we think was carried over from EPA's general permit, but looking at our RIPDES regulations, records must be maintained for 5 years. So we're proposing this change to our permit to be consistent with those regulations. The last miscellaneous change that we're making to the permit is that to comply with an e-reporting rule, the EPA e-reporting rule, we have been asked to ask applicants to provide a 6-digit North American and Industry Classification System code, otherwise known as a NAICS code. This NAICS code must be provided as part of the Notice of Intent submission. To assist facilities in supplying this information to DEM on the NOI, we have created an SIC code, NAICS code crosswalk table in the permit. Here you'll be able to look for your current SIC code and match it up with the applicable NAICS code. Please keep in mind that SIC codes will continue to determine the sector-specific requirements in the permit. The NAICS codes are being provided for additional information, as I said, to comply with the e-reporting rule. As stated earlier, we'll be moving on to the permit reissuance process and schedule portion of the discussion. Our anticipated public notice of the 2024 draft MSGP is late May. This public notice period must be a minimum of 30 days. Once that 30-day period is over, DEM will respond to any comments received in writing and either issue the permit as originally drafted, issue it with minor changes, or not issue the permit as drafted and start over. Our anticipated effective date of the 2024 MSGP is early fall 2024. For all facilities that intend to reapply or have existing coverage under the 2019 MSGP, outfall sampling will be required starting January 1st, 2025. Between May 2nd, 2024, which is the expiration date of the 2019 MSGP, and January 1st, 2025, all permit requirements outlined in the 2019 MSGP will apply, with the exception of the outfall sampling and analysis. This includes the submission of a 2024 annual report. Keep in mind, as we mentioned in the announcement for this workshop, no exposure certifications and no discharge certifications are not affected by the permit expiration. The last major point I want to mention is that a renewal NOI for existing permittees and an updated stormwater management plan must be submitted within 90 days of the effective date of the permit. That effective date is to be announced. So now I will turn things over to Jen Stout to go over any questions that were asked. We'll go over the answers and we'll give people an opportunity to raise their hand and ask additional questions.
Thanks, Brian. So just a few questions that came in through the chat while you were speaking. One was, will the slides be available following the webinar? Yes, we will post them on our website. We have a second session on April 30th, so we're going to, decide which one to post, and we'll post it on our website then. I may try to also just post the slides following this webinar to this Teams meeting. I'm not sure if I can do that, but I'm going to try, so that when you go back to your Teams meeting for this meeting, you might be able to see those slides. So you can check that. It might be available in files, or in any case, we will post it and we'll send out an email to let you know when it's available. The next question was, is the benchmark limit for TSS still 100? And what is the limit for COD? So I just took a table from our proposed permit. Yes, TSS is still 100 milligrams per liter, and then chemical oxygen demand is proposed at 120 milligrams per liter. So that was that. And then we had a question on the iron removal and whether it applies to sector E. And according to the slide that you showed, Brian, I listed the subsectors that it applies to. So those are the only questions that we got through the chat. If anybody wants to raise their hand, we can unmute you if you'd like to speak, or you can put a question in the chat in writing. We just got a new question. Will the sampling that begins in January 2025 be perpetual testing, or will the requirement cease once we meet the period of benchmark testing? Brian, do you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. Great question. Thanks, Raymond. Yeah, I mean, that requirement is not, we went over what's going to change. So that requirement will be consistent with the 2019 permit. Yes, you'll have to resume benchmark monitoring at the start of the year. But if you go through the whole year, you're under benchmarks for all parameters, benchmark monitoring can cease. All right, any other questions? It's like Bill Druin has a question.
Okay, Bill, hopefully I have unmuted you or disabled. I'm not sure. Are you able to? You can unmute yourself, I think. Bill.
That might be better.
There we go.
Thank you. I actually have two questions. The first question is related to the current way that we sample the indicator and the benchmark parameters. We do basically 2 sampling events per semi-annual period. So it's not considered quarterly, but it's certainly considered 2 samples per semi-annual. We interpret that, and there needs to be a month between each sampling event. So essentially, it's quarterly. And I think in general, most people deal with this as being quarterly. So I wanted to know if that will remain the same in the next general permit, because it did not get talked about. I suspect we are still under that same criteria.
Yes, anything that wasn't discussed is still in the permit, but it's good to clarify. Appreciate your question. That will remain the same.
Thank you. My second question is related to COD. I have a lot of history with high COD. We have tried a variety of methods to reduce COD by either washing pavement to make sure our housekeeping is better at our facilities, to ask people not to empty coffee or soda containers onto the ground. And in most of these instances, our ONG numbers are very low, usually below detection limit. So it doesn't seem like the COD is being brought about by ONG or other transportation type of fluids, transmission or power steering, whichever. So I was wondering if there is any better guidance documents on how we can attempt to lower that COD level. That's really a very difficult process. And we're at the point now where some of our facilities may require treatment of stormwater, which we think may be financially not feasible. So I just wanted to kind of get a general comment from your group. Thank you.
Bill, what industries do you represent?
P, M, and basically P and M. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, this will be our first foray into, universal benchmarks for COD. But based on the NRC study, it was recommended that COD is a better indicator of overall site cleanliness. Now, in terms of providing guidance, it brings up a good point. We are going to provide more guidance in terms of, how to comply with the new permit. This will all be provided following the permit issuance process. I'll take your question into consideration and look to see, besides just good housekeeping and keeping your site clean, preventing pollution, what can be done to remove COD in terms of possible treatment options. I don't have those answers off the top of my head right now, but I can think about it, look into it, and make that information available, especially since you're having a challenge with it now.
Sure. I'm a consultant, and I have clients that are in most of the New York State, or most of New England, including New York, Pennsylvania. I have clients out in Minnesota and Florida, so I have a pretty wide range. COD is probably the hardest, in my opinion, indicator parameter or benchmark parameter that we can control. TSS is relatively simple. ONG is simple. COD seems to be quite a problem, and I've run into that almost daily. It's really quite a difficult parameter to try to lower. So any information we greatly appreciated, Brian.
All right, yeah, I'll talk to EPA counterparts and see what experience they have, since they've already incorporated this in their permit. And I definitely appreciate the feedback. That's what this session is all about. So we can think more deeply about how these requirements will affect, permittees. So thank you.
Carrie, did you have a question that you wanted to ask?
Yes, I do. I actually have 2. The first one is, you said the required monitoring has to be done even outside of normal business hours. Are we not concerned about hold times for like fecal?
No, certainly, you know, all that timing and coordination needs to be considered. What we don't want people saying is, we weren't able to get a sample outside of business hours, and therefore we can't comply. Certainly, we know it's very challenging to capture these storm events when there's an actual discharge and to get the sampling done. I'm not going to sit here and say that it's easy.
Yeah.
But what I encourage people to do, and what I've encouraged people to do when they come up with this challenge, is to say, plan ahead, try to get your sampling done early in the monitoring period so that you don't have to rely on those crazy off-hour events. But certainly we know there are challenges. It's not an easy thing to do. I'm not discounting that.
Yeah, I was more concerned with the whole time for the lab, for the analysis portion of it. My other question is regarding, you say we're at the NBC, the Narragansett Bay Commission. We provided you in the past a link to our two MSG or two swamps. And in those, on our website, we don't provide all the information, such as our site plans and pollution prevention team people, their numbers, and, you know, some information regarding our buildings where we're allowed to do that. Now that we're going to have to upload them to you, would we still provide that information to you? And if yes, would that be available to the public?
Yes, the stormwater management plan information is public information.
Right.
It would be uploaded into Net MSGP and it would be viewable. I believe, Crystal, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that's viewable from the public domain.
We're more concerned on the actual plans of the site. You know, being a sewer agency, we're concerned, you know, with terrorism, things of that nature. And also, we don't want our, you know, we have in our attachments to the swamps, we do have everybody's phone numbers, home, work, cell phones, all of that. So that's available for our employees if they need us after hours or whatever. And we obviously don't want that information. I certainly don't want my home number and my personal cell number out to the public. So,
Yeah, I think you could just
Yeah.
provide the key point, you know, point of contact, the main phone number for the
Yeah.
facility. That would be adequate.
okay, yeah, I just, you know, and then I just want some information on whether we need to provide the actual site plans and stuff like that. So we don't need that. We don't provide that to the public here. We don't.
I'll have to get back to you on whether we would require you to do it.
Mhm.
Normally a stormwater management plan requires a site plan. Joe, maybe you can
Right.
jump in on this one.
Yeah, Carrie, I'll just, can you hear me, Brian? Okay, Carrie, just to, with regards to the site plan, I would say yes, include that. I mean, frankly, it's public information as part of the, our approval of the facilities plan or issuance of the order of approval. If someone were to come into our office and fill out APRA, Access to Public Records Act request, they could get that information. Certainly phone numbers, I think that's a very valid point, and we'll consider that. But as far as the site plans, that already is public.
Yeah, well, if people come in and ask for it, we will show them, but we don't want it, we don't, generally speaking, have it on our website so everybody can see where all our structures are, that type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, we're, you know, I don't, just being upfront, you know, I think as far as the site plan, we would expect that to be uploaded and be public. But the phone numbers, that's valid, and you know, I think we would be receptive to maybe you omit that and just put on file, you know, in the version that will be available to the public. You can just put on file, and you would have those phone numbers at your disposal on the facility side.
Yeah, all right, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure what we had to give you versus, you know, what we need to do. But thank you.
Yep, great questions.
Yes, thanks for the feedback and the questions. Jen, do we have any new questions come up in the chat?
Yes, we have new questions. One question is, are the changes for Sector P only for transfer stations or all of Sector P facilities?
It just applies to those particular transfer stations that are engaged in the temporary storage and or transfer of solid waste if it's exposed to stormwater. So it's not all sector P.
Okay. Then we had a question from Carrie Britt, similar, I think, to what she just said. And I wanted to also mention that I believe there is some language in in-net MSGP when you upload your SWIMP that allows you to redact any, personal information or, information that should not be public. So look out for that. The next question we have is, will sample results from multiple outfalls at one facility be averaged and compared against the pollutant benchmark, or will each outfall be compared against pollutant benchmarks, resulting in some drainage areas potentially requiring continuing sampling and corrective actions, while other drainage areas may be considered compliant with benchmarks?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's outfall specific. So you're looking at preventing pollution going to each outfall, and you're monitoring whether that pollution prevention is working by monitoring for those benchmark parameters at each outfall. So if you exceed the benchmark, the average of your results exceeds the benchmark, then you need to continue benchmark sampling and potentially, well, you have to institute corrective actions for that drainage area that outfall applies to. Hope that answers the question.
Okay. Next question is, what does the testing for stormwater outside of normal business hours mean? Brian did touch on this already. Not sure. Chad, do you still have a question on that? If you do, raise your hand.
Yeah, he says I answered it
Okay.
already. The bottom line
Okay.
is, we know it's safer, it's easier, it's more convenient to sample during business hours. And we know that you probably will do that whenever you can. We just don't want people saying, DEM, we weren't able to get our samples done because, this one opportunity to get a sample is outside of business hours and we didn't make adjustments to deal with it. Like I said, try to plan ahead, do the best you can. If you have a challenging situation, we want you to be successful in complying with the permit. If you're successful, we're successful. So reach out to my program, either Jennifer or myself, and we'll help you work through any particular issues that you're having. But good question, Chad. Thank you.
Okay, the next question says 5-year record retention for new owners of facility and MSGP for 3 years. Would balance of 5-year retention requirement fall to previous owners or to the new owners? It's a good question.
It would apply to the new owner, whoever's the owner at the time that the permit is issued.
All right, next question. What are some BMPs for zinc exceedances at a facility that does not use zinc in its processes?
We have, I know of course, my time in this program is limited, but I do have experience in this program from past years. But I do know we have a couple facilities that have galvanized roofing or galvanized material, which contributes zinc to stormwater. That has been a challenge for those facilities. Ultimately, a corrective action might be to filter that stormwater with a media or some sort of filter sock or some sort of filtration device that can remove the zinc if the source of the zinc cannot be eliminated because it's part of the building, something very significant that can't be just changed.
Yeah, Brian, just to add to that also, there are some other sources that maybe aren't as obvious, clearly if you've got, galvanized materials that you store outside, or you have, you produce a product that has zinc in it, that's an obvious exposure. Maybe some that are less obvious, Brian mentioned, if you've got galvanized fencing or materials, that's potentially one. The source could potentially be eliminated by painting those materials or substituting them out. But another lesser known source, zinc is often used in vulcanized rubber. So if you have heavy forklift traffic on your site, outside bringing products in and out, that could be a potential source of zinc and could be removed through better cleaning of those paved areas where forklift traffic is heaviest, or like Brian mentioned, some kind of higher level of treatment at the end. But just wanted to add that in.
Thanks, Joe.
Okay, and it looks like Bill has another question. He's got his hand up. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, are you able to provide a link to that new MSGP? I just did a quick scan through the RIDEM MSGP, and it lists a lot of the 2019 stuff. I was wondering, and I may have missed that in the beginning.
It's not posted yet. This
Okay.
is sort of the first, because we want to gather feedback and possibly make additional changes before we post it for the public notice. It's not available just yet, but when we issue it for the public notice, we'll make it available. We'll make this presentation available on our website after the 30th, which will be next week. The presentation slides as well as the recording.
I have a facility in Smithfield that may be moving their facility due to the historic floodplain issues, and they're currently under the 2019, and they're making the change hopefully in May or June of this year. So I suspect we'll need to just resubmit an NOI in a new location, considering that it's we'll determine that it's a new discharge permit requirement. That seems like our best approach. We're going to have to do the NOT, I suspect. We're going to have to terminate the historic facility permit and then do a new NOI based on our current 2024. Right now it's draft, but hopefully it'll be final soon.
Yeah, so Bill, to get into some of the details on that situation. So yes, if you have a new facility, they'll need to get separate new coverage under the MSGP. Now, in terms of people being able to get coverage right now, people cannot get coverage under the 2019 MSGP as of right now, and that'll continue to be the case until the new permit is issued. So what we would tell people in that case is keep your eye out for the new permit, the announcements about being able to submit an NOI for a new facility. And Joe, maybe you can jump in on what people should keep in mind if they want to start a new discharge prior to issuance of the 2024 MSGP.
Yeah, so if they're going to have a new discharge, there's going to be a period of time here where essentially the current permit will be administratively continued before the new 2024 permit becomes effective. If that's the case, essentially you have a new outfall, new discharge, comply with the requirements from the 2019 general permit, except for sampling. So inspection, BMP type requirements, comply with all of those. When the 2024 permit becomes effective, we would then expect you to apply for the, include that new discharge in your new NOI that's submitted under the 2024 permit, and your monitoring will commence starting in 2025.
Yeah, and that same concept will apply to someone who intended to do a change NOI, prior to the new permit coming out. You're unable to do a change NOI, so what I've told people, you know, if you need to update your stormwater management plan, you can update it, keep it on file, and then have it ready for when the NOI is available for you to renew or to submit a new application. Obviously, that new NOI will apply to the new permit. The stormwater management plan requirements will apply to the new permit. So you'll have to review the new permit for any applicable changes to your facility stormwater management plan. Anyway, it looks
So-
like Bill had another question.
Yeah, so I just wanted to follow up a little bit. So essentially my facility is going to be sort of, I don't want to say on hold, but I'm not sure. They can't apply for 2019 and they have to wait for 2024. You know, we can update the stormwater plan. We can prepare an NOI that we're not going to submit until availability is available. That's redundant. But that's I guess that's where we're at. If they close their facility in June and start operations in September, and the new permit's not out, then we may not be under coverage. I mean, yes, we can do the inspections, more than happy to do the inspections and like I said, rewrite the stormwater plan, but there's no vehicle to become you know, to be under
Authorized.
coverage. Yeah. So I mean, as
That's
long
correct.
as okay, as long as it, I mean, that makes sense to me. I want to make sure that we're all on the same page on that.
Yeah,
And-
in
and
a
my-
situation like that, Bill, I would say, you know, instead of waiting to the end of the 90-day renewal period or new application period, well, the 90 days wouldn't apply to that situation. You'd have to apply sooner, but I would just say, get that application in as soon as possible so you can get that coverage beginning early.
Thank you. My last question is related to the Net DMR CDX program and how RIDEM interfaces with that. Currently, there are no benchmark limitations in that CDX format. Will there be limitations on that in the new permit?
No, the new DMRs will be similar to the previous format of the DMRs in the past. So you'll have to know what your benchmarks are to do your evaluation. It's not going to be shown, you know, in the DMR itself.
Other states have list those criteria limits.
Yeah, there's a function called alert limits, and I'll be honest with you, we lost staff. I'm just getting started with this program, and we didn't really have time to add that feature this time around. Certainly, it would make our jobs easier, your jobs easier, if we could have that in there. There's other benefits to the regulators in terms of getting notifications when benchmarks are exceeded. But like I said, the timeline and the staffing issues didn't allow for us to do that this cycle, but we may certainly consider that in the next round. In another 5 years, I did talk about that with Crystal. I thought it was a great, you know, addition, but just given the amount of work that was required to do that, we decided to pass on that this time around.
Thank you, Brian.
Okay, more in the chat. So Crystal had posted the language in our NOI about the confidential business information being redacted. So if that was specifically for Carrie Britt's question. The next question is, will an annual stormwater report be required, I guess, for 2024? And the answer to that is yes, it will be required January 30th, 2025. So even though the permit expires, you're still expected to, you know, administratively continued, you're still expected to comply and then submit the annual report due January 30th, 2025. The next question is, do you have benchmarks for copper? I think that was the.
What is the benchmark value?
I'm not sure.
It
And
didn't change from what was in the permit previously. What did change is who it applies to. We added some new industrial sectors that need to do the benchmark monitoring for copper. So you could refer to the 2019 MSGP for the concentration of the copper benchmark. I do not have it off the top of my head. I can pull it up while we're.
Okay. While Brian's doing that, we'll go on to the next question. Where is the NOI application on the DEM website? I can't seem to find it. So Raymond, as Brian said before, right now, nobody is allowed to submit an NOI application because the permit is about to expire and will be administratively continued. So you won't be able to apply for a new NOI or even renew an NOI until the new permit becomes effective sometime later, at the end of the summer, early fall. In that case, you're going to be doing this application electronically through NET MSGP. And we do have a portion on our website that talks about, how to get through there. You need to get an account with CDX, and I think Crystal could probably explain that better if we need to. But right now, nothing can happen until the new permit is issued. Hope that answers your question.
And Jennifer, I did pull up the current permit, which has the copper benchmarks, and I'm going to share that. Can you see this is like one particular sector, sector A. Can everybody see that, Jen?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, so this is sector A, specifically subsector A2 has copper monitoring. For saltwater discharges, the benchmark concentration is set. You can see it's 0.0048 milligrams per liter. For freshwater discharge locations, the copper benchmark will be consistent with this table, but it's hardness dependent. So we're not introducing a lower copper benchmark. We're just applying these benchmarks to new sectors. So you can refer to the current permit for those concentrations. Benchmark concentrations.
And that, that segues into the next question. Can you further explain the new copper requirement for sector R? Ship and boat building and repair yards. So I'm not.
Well, and now we'll apply to the stormwater discharges from the outfalls from those industries that are in sector R. So you'll have to monitor for copper. I'm assuming that you're already familiar with benchmark monitoring for other parameters in your sector. Now you'll just have an additional parameter that you'll need to monitor for at those outfalls. And obviously, or maybe not obviously, the benchmarks parameter and the concentration is a number that you want to try to stay below. So as you do your monitoring and you get your results, you want to make adjustments at your site to try to minimize the discharge of that parameter from your site. As I said, we're going to provide additional guidance following the issuance of the permit, where we can delve into some of these new benchmarks and where they apply to new sectors, and maybe provide some additional guidance to help people meet those benchmarks.
Real quick, Robert asked if we would summarize and publish the Q&As from today's webinar. We will be posting the recording of this webinar. You might also be able to see it at the end. It'll come up in the Teams meeting, so you'll be able to refer back to it. You should be able to see the recording, and there should also be a transcript available. So we're going to also be posting that to our website, like we said before. So let's see real quickly. Russell, will PFAS monitoring be a part of the new permit?
No.
Okay. Quick and easy answer. All right, Jay Brolin, hold on a second. you have a question, let me allow your mic. Okay, go ahead, Jay. What's your question? Jay, you just have to unmute yourself. Okay, Jay saying he can't unmute. I don't know. Okay. Benchmark monitoring, no flow. Are you asking if, I'm not sure what you're asking, I'm sorry. Brian, you're on mute.
Yeah, can you type it in the chat, Jay?
If the question is, do they have to conduct benchmark monitoring if there is no flow from the outfall? The short answer to that is no. You would not have to conduct any monitoring if there is no flow. There's a no D code that you can use for no flow. However, with that being said, that would only apply if there was no flow from that outfall for the entire monitoring period. So for the entire 6-month period. So I think that may be where he's going with that question. If not, Jay, you can provide more details on the nature of the question.
So Jay said, but if the new permit indicates if we have less than 4 samples, we need to keep monitoring. Brian, do you want to take
You
that?
have to keep monitoring the next cycle. So you can't get out of the benchmarks by saying, you know, we were less than the average. The 4 samples were less than the average of the 4 samples were less than the benchmark criteria or benchmark value based on 3 samples, and therefore we don't need to do benchmark monitoring going forward. What you'd have to do is continue benchmark monitoring until you could get those 4 samples and show that you're below the average.
Yeah, and conversely, you know, if you were greater than the benchmark for less than 4 samples, we don't want you to wait to take corrective actions.
It's a good question, Jay. Thank you.
It is.
I don't see any other questions in the chat, and I don't see any other hands raised. Any other questions out there?
I see one hand raised, but I don't know if it's still Jay's hand.
Yeah, it looks like it's still Jay's hand. Okay.
Thanks, Jay. You can ask another question, Jay. I'm not saying that.
Jen, maybe I just want to add, because I did see, Jen, that you did respond to the question about the annual report that's due January 25, or January 2025. And I saw that you responded yes. I just wanted to clarify that, you know, so that annual report will actually include, you know, most of it will be requirements from the 2019 permit that they're addressing in that annual report. So short answer is yes, there still will be an annual report due this coming January. But I just want people to recognize that what they'll actually be reporting on is compliance with the 2019 general permit.
Yeah, and the annual report format will be the same as you're used to until the following year. So you'll be using the same annual report format that you've been using under the 2019 MSGP that you will submit by January 30th, 2025. Then when you do your annual report for the 2025 year, you'll use the new format. There's not much change other than the ability to upload the corrective action report. And maybe some other minor changes, but nothing significant. And certainly if people have questions, you know, after we issue the permit, as I said, we're going to provide additional guidance following the permit issuance, as we've done in the past. But if you have questions along the way, we're here to help. Feel free to reach out to us.
Any other questions? Like we said, we will be going through the formal public notice process. So any comments you want to put out at that time, we will be, you know, addressing in writing.
Yeah, we'll be announcing the public notice process, you know, when it begins and the documents where they're available. We'll be announcing that on social media. We'll send an email similar to the invitation you received for this. So we'll be reaching out to stakeholders so they're aware. I guess the last thing I'll say is thanks for making that last minute adjustment to switch to the Teams format for us. The Zoom option was a last minute change for us as well. I apologize for that, but hopefully things worked out. And I just want to thank you all again for attending and for the feedback and the questions. We appreciate it greatly, and I hope you guys, you know, got something out of this presentation as well.
Yes, and there is one more question, because that asks, are the changes posted to the website? So when we go through the public notice process, we'll be posting the draft permit as well as the fact sheet. The fact sheet will cover, you know, most of the proposed changes. Plus, you know, we'll be posting the slides from this presentation, which, you know, summarizes the changes, and as well as the recording. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yep, that's correct. Thanks, Jen.
Okay.
All right. Without
Thank you,
further
everybody.
ado, I guess we'll
Give you
let
back
you
a few
all go.
minutes.
Thank you very
all.
much.
Thanks for your participation.